Welcome to the Historic Landmarks Center, located on Rice Park in beautiful downtown St. Paul. For nearly 65 years, this building represented the federal government in St. Paul. The post office and the federal courts were housed here, along with other offices such as the Customs Service, the Internal Revenue Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, and more. During the Depression, newly formed government agencies had their first office in the Federal Courts building, such as Works Progress Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Rural Electrification Administration, the Farmers Home Administration, known better as the FHA, and even the FBI had its fledgling offices here. The site of an entire city block was a gift of the city of St. Paul. It is trapezoidal in shape, bounded by 6th Street on the north, 5th Street on the south, Washington Street on the west, and Market Street on the east. Excavation for the building began in 1892. Cass Gilbert, the famous architect to whom Minnesota owes its state capital, was for a brief period superintendent of construction. In 1893, the St. Paul firm of Hennessy and Cox was awarded the contract for the cut stone and brickwork, the largest part of the construction. By law, this part of the construction had to use local materials. The pink granite you see on the exterior came from St. Cloud. St. Paul furnished the limestone, and Mankato, Minnesota, the cement. The original budget was set at $800,000. which allowed construction up to the roof line, after which additional funds had to be requested. The main building was completed in 1902. The North Tower was added and completed in 1908. The total cost, including furnishings, came to $2.5 million. The building was designed under the supervising architect of the Treasury, Willoughby J. Edbrook. Working under him was a staff of about 500 designers, engineers, and assistants. A building such as this, one tended to be the result of a team effort, and its planning would often outlast any one supervising architect. Thus, the plans for the Federal Courts building were signed by 6 consecutive architects. Let's take a closer look at the stunning exterior details to better appreciate the extraordinary craftsmanship and renovation of the building. The building was considered an architectural masterpiece at the time. Its style is generally called Romanesque Revival or Richardsonian Romanesque. Henry Hobson Richardsonian, after having studied in Paris, brought back to this country a distinctive style that he applied to the Trinity Church in Boston, which was much admired and much imitated. The low Syrian arches at the entrances and the window grouping are typical of his design. The overall form of the outside of the building is divided into 3 areas. The ground floor shows the Syrian arches from all 4 sides. They are particularly interesting because of their imaginative and whimsical stone carvings. Urban legend has it that the stone carvers signed their work by carving their own likeness into the stone on our front porch. If you look up above the front arches, you will see a bat with floral eyes and an owl. One can only speculate why they were carved. In ancient Greek cultures, the owl represented wisdom and the bat rebirth and death, symbolism for those who entered the building underneath them. A heavy continuous molding marks the top of the first story. The second and third stories are treated on the exterior as a single unit. Windows of both stories are aligned vertically under round-headed arches, which lightly restate the shapes of the lower, more monumentally scaled arches. The middle zone is also defined by a continuous molding, but more delicately so. The top section contains 2 stories, which hold an array of small windows, dormers, and conical turrets. Surmounting all this is the slender South Tower, which is a copy of the Trinity Church Tower in Boston and rises 170 feet from street level. This tower was designed to have a four-sided clock. However, a clock was not installed until 1974, when a clock was added in honor of Charles Noose, a former postmaster. There is another strong architectural influence visible, which is called Chateauesque. The majestic dimensions of the building, the smooth surfaces of the masonry, the small round towers protruding from the mass of the building at the second story, the fanciful gables with the green oxidized copper roofs, and the dormer windows are all reminiscent of castles in France, from which Richard Morris Hunt, an East Coast architect, derived this style. The federal government moved out in 1967, when the new, modern federal courts building was completed farther east, close to the river. This lovely old structure stood empty, in decay, and architecturally obsolete. The very real possibility of losing this building to the wrecking ball was unthinkable to many Minnesotans, and a grassroots campaign was mounted to save the building, spearheaded by a group of determined citizens, volunteers, and civic leaders. Saving the old federal courts building was a two-part challenge back in the early 1970s. The team of citizens and civic leaders who fervently believed the building was historic and worth preserving had the task of convincing government leaders. They achieved success when President Nixon put the building on the list of National Historic Monuments in 1972, and Ramsey County took ownership. Then the task of restoring and renovating the decaying building was taken up. The civic team undertook the challenge and formed Minnesota Landmarks Incorporated, a nonprofit organization to raise the funds necessary to preserve, maintain, and give a new purpose and mission to the then renamed Landmark Center. They were successful in raising the funds from citizens, private foundations, and corporate donors, and grandly reopened the doors in 1978. Since then, Minnesota Landmarks has served as the preservation management and programming agency for Landmark Center, in partnership with Ramsey County. This unique partnership has resulted in Landmark Center as a thriving cultural home to arts agencies, as well as a cultural gathering place for life celebrations, festivals, concerts, and more. Now let's move into the building to the stunning four-story cortile atrium. The word cortile is Italian for courtyard. The first impression upon entering Landmark Center is one of surprise and awe as the cortile reaches up to the airy, graceful skylight above the 6th floor. However, this was not always so. The post office, which occupied the largest space among the government agencies, took up the whole first floor and some of the basement. Covering the first floor was a ceiling, in accordance with federal regulations governing post offices. The ceilings also contained catwalks and transom windows for postal inspectors to raise and lower the windows to look down on the postal employees below. The windows also supplied airflow and natural light to the enclosed workspaces below. During the restoration and renovation, the ceiling and windows were removed, and the post office walls removed as well. Italian tiles were laid for flooring, and the newly created atrium soared upwards to the skylight above. Over the years, in an effort to make federal offices and spaces more uniform, the surfaces throughout the first floor had been painted government green, similar to a dark apple green. The removal of the paint in 1974 revealed marble wainscoting, which originated from quarries in Vermont and Tennessee, and revealed grand columns, which are one of the building's greatest assets. Let's move to the marble north lobby or ham foyer, which is under the north tower. The lobby faces the Ham Building on St. Peter Street and was used as the official or main entrance after the whole north section was completed in 1908. The white marble, which was also painted green, originated in Rutland, Vermont. Looking at the marble today, one can hardly believe that it was ever painted over. A peroxide solution was used to remove the paint, and only if one looks very closely is a trace of green still visible in the word directory carved on the wall. The chandeliers are reproductions of the original ones, which were fueled by gas and electricity. The marble lobby still has its original mosaic floor with its classical fret border. The west wall is inscribed with the names of individuals, corporations, and foundations that made the restoration of Landmark Center possible. The east wall is inscribed with the names of those individuals named Landmark Fellows in recognition of their immense contribution to saving Landmark Center. Now let's move up to the 4th floor to look at the 2 restored courtrooms there. The Chief Justice Room, Courtroom 430, is the most ornate room in the building. It began as the law library, and in 1924, during Prohibition, it was converted to a courtroom due to the growing caseload of people accused of bootlegging liquor. It continued to serve as a courtroom by Judge Edward Devitt until the federal courts moved to their new location in 1967. It is named in honor of the 2 U.S. Supreme Court justices from Minnesota, both of whom clerked in the building, Chief Justice Warren Burger and Associate Justice Harry Blackmun. Both men grew up in St. Paul and were close childhood friends. Their legal paths took them to the highest court, where their friendship was tested, Justice Burger being a conservative and Justice Blackmun liberal-leaning. The mahogany paneling, with its intricate wood carving, is of particular interest. It contains many details such as acanthus leaves and the initials for United States, Minnesota, and St. Paul. The acanthus leaf, dental design, and egg and dart borders, all Greco-Roman details at the top of the wood paneling, are repeated throughout the building. The white marble fireplace with its female figure on each side depicting law and justice was a handsome disguise for the original gravity heat register. Today it is purely decorative. The beautiful leaded glass ceiling dome, which is now backlit, was painted over to prevent water leakage and damage. The plaster bas-relief heads surrounding the dome represent the founding fathers of modern law. Justinian, the Roman emperor, appointed a commission of judges and jurists to collect and codify the then existing laws. His name is the root of the word justice. Cicero, famous Roman jurist and philosopher who shaped the concept of intent in the law. Solon, the Greek who reformed and clarified criminal and civil law in Athens. And finally, under Pericles, and another Athenian, a law was created which stipulated that soldiers and judges should be paid for their services. The room is painted in bold Victorian colors, and this particular shade of green recalls the original shade. There was also a circular staircase leading to the upper gallery, which was removed when the function of the room was changed from law library to courtroom. The furniture you see in the galleries above were donated by the family of Judge Devitt upon his passing. The floor is maple and the doors and trim are oak. The doorknobs and hinges are original. The light fixtures, however, are copies of the originals. One of the important and wonderful activities that has taken place in this building, and in fact in this courtroom, is the naturalization of immigrants as new U.S. citizens. Since it opened its doors, and still happening today, thousands of individuals have proudly taken the oath of citizenship to become new Americans. As we step outside the room and walk towards 408, take a moment to enjoy the view of the court teal from the 4th floor. The court teal is quite typical of buildings of this period. Similar structures are found in the Washington Post Office on Pennsylvania Avenue, which now in 2020 is an international hotel, and the federal buildings in Milwaukee, Buffalo, and Omaha. As the building began to age, the skylight over the 6th floor was covered with corrugated asbestos tiles. One of the first projects of the restoration was to remove those tiles and to replace them with clear glass, which again allowed the sunlight to enter the courtyard. The glass is double thickness thermal pane for energy efficiency. It was repaired and updated again in 2019. Looking down, you will notice that the floor design mirrors the trusses of the first layer of the framework above it, with wide forming larger squares in which 6 smaller squares are enclosed. This pattern was also the pattern of the ceiling and transom window system that was between the first and second floors. Those large trusses became the catwalks over which postal supervisors could keep an eye on the workers below. From here, we will visit Courtroom 408, home of the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, when the building opened. In 1973, it was dedicated as the Sanborn Room. 2 generations of Sanborns held court in this room. Judge Walter Sanborn served over 35 years on the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. Before his career ended, his cousin, John Sanborn, became a district judge, and in 1932, John Sanborn was appointed to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. He was succeeded by Associate Justice Harry Blackmun, who served until his appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1970. Interesting to mention, Associate Justice Blackmun just happened to start his law career as Judge John Sanborn's law clerk. The interior of this room is marble paneled. Again, the egg and dart borders, dental designs, and acanthus leaves can be found. The window wall is a good example of Richardsonian design. Also, another stunning backlit leaded glass dome. The leaded glass dome was restored after paint was removed. The room is painted a deep, rich blue, a color very much favored at the turn of the century. The furniture was donated by the Weyerhaeuser family. Now, just a word about the egg and dart motif we keep seeing. In ancient Greece, the egg was a symbol for life, and the dart represented death. Thus, this pattern reminds us we are in a locale where matters of life and death, judgment and justice were weighed. Looking into the alcove on the right, the north tower and portions of the roof are visible. In 1937, the original terracotta tiles were replaced with asphalt shingles. In 1973, the decision was made to restore the roof to its earlier state. Amazingly, Brooks Cavan, one of the restoring architects, was able to trace the 50-year-old mold to the Ohio office of the Ludovici Tile Company. It was the same company founded in Italy in the 16th century which had provided the first tiles. More recently, in 2015, the roof towers were in need of repair. Unlike the rest of the building and roof, the towers had never been touched. In partnership with Ramsey County, owners of Landmark Center, Minnesota Landmarks was able to discover that Ludovici was still in business and still had the original mold of our terracotta tiles. Thus, we were able to repair and recover the towers using tiles identical to the originals. It would seem the oxymoron, authentic reproduction, applies in this case. Let's head down to the 3rd floor. Down 1 floor, we enter Courtroom 326, now called the Butler Room. It is the perfect setting for small concerts, lectures, meetings, luncheons, and small wedding ceremonies. Before renovations and restoration, the ceiling was covered with false ceiling panels from which hung fluorescent lighting. The original foliate molded crossbeams were discovered after the removal of the panels. The light fixtures are replicas of lights hung elsewhere in the building. The wainscoting is similar to the other courtrooms, with U.S. the dominating theme. The most striking feature of this room is the Elizabethan Tudor faux fireplace, which used to function as a hot air gravity register, but is non-functioning today. Perhaps one of the most notable features about Landmark Center's courtrooms is that they are all completely different from one another in decor and style, as will be seen in our final courtroom visit. But before we leave, I just want to tell you one thing. It was in this courtroom that the empire builder James J. Hill gave his sworn deposition in the United States' very first antitrust suit, filed by the U.S. government against Hill's massive Northern Securities Company, which held a monopoly on the railroads in the mid- and northwestern United States. Teddy Roosevelt sought to bust up Hill's rail empire and was successful in this suit. Walking past the elevators, you will come to Courtroom 317, also called the Ramsey County Room, the largest of the 4 courtrooms. It was originally 2 stories high with a spectator gallery on the west side. In 1925, when the Chief Justice Room became a courtroom, a ceiling was installed between the first and second levels to accommodate the law library on the upper floor. This is the courtroom in which the infamous gangster trials were held. Some of America's most wanted criminals came to justice in this room during the 1930s. Doc Barker, Alvin Creepy Karpis, Dillinger's Mall Evelyn Frechette, and more were sentenced from here. Why were there so many infamous gangsters tried in St. Paul? St. Paul was an open city during Prohibition and became a haven for bootleggers. The irony here is that up on the 5th floor, now private offices, was the office of Andrew J. Volstead, legal advisor to the Northwest Prohibition Enforcement District. Volstead was a Republican congressman from Granite Falls who rewrote and sponsored the Volstead Act in 1919 that put the Prohibition enforcement agents, the Untouchables, to work hunting down bootleggers, stills, and distributors. In 1924, St. Paul Police Chief John J. O'Connor devised what became known as the O'Connor system, whereby the gangsters and bootleggers would come to St. Paul and check in at the Green Lantern Speakeasy to alert the police they were in town. They would make a generous monthly donation to the Police, Widow, and Orphans Fund, agree not to commit any crimes within the city limits of St. Paul. In return, they would be allowed to live and spend their money without the police bothering them. With corruption inside the police force, FBI raids were unsuccessful, criminals got away, and money flowed easily in St. Paul. Word of the O'Connor system spread, and practically all the gangsters who were wanted in other parts of the country came. After Prohibition was repealed, these gangs turned to bank robberies, which became an unprofitable business after the U.S. government passed the Federal Banking Act in 1933. Kidnapping for ransom followed in spite of the passage of the Lindbergh Act, which also made kidnapping a federal offense. The Barker Karpis gang kidnapped St. Paul brewer William Ham Jr., who was taken to Bensonville, Illinois, where he was held for 4 days. A ransom of $100,000 was asked, which was paid, and Ham was promptly released near Wyoming, Minnesota. This kidnapping was so successful that it was repeated with St. Paul banker Edward Bremer, who was taken to the same house in Bensonville. This time, $200,000 was asked and received, and Bremer was released. The Toohey gang was at first presumed to have been responsible. They were arrested and tried in this courtroom, but were acquitted for lack of conclusive evidence. The Barker Karpis gang, comprised of Ma Barker's 4 sons, led by Creepy Karpis, actually carried out the kidnappings. Doc Barker and Karpis were tried in this courtroom. Ma and her remaining son Fred were killed in a shootout in Florida. St. Paul eventually returned to being a safe and sane city it had been before crime came to town. Now let's descend down to the 2nd floor where the galleries are. The 2nd floor is currently occupied by the American Association of Woodturners Gallery of Wood Art and the Schubert Club Museum, both free to the public, and you'll want to check their websites for their current hours and status before coming down to visit. Now let's head down to the basement. On the lower level of Landmark Center is the Frederick King Weyerhaeuser Auditorium, a multi-purpose auditorium theater which seats 231 people and offers unobstructed sightlines and excellent acoustics. While the design is contemporary, great attention has been paid to the tradition of the building in choice of materials, oak and plaster, and in the use of rich conservative tones. The F.K. Weyerhaeuser Auditorium has been designed, above all, to be versatile and flexible to accommodate lectures, films, theater, musical, and dance performances, as well as radio and television broadcasts. Currently, it's home to Landmark Center's annual history plays, piano recitals, folk music concert series, and more. As we move down the hallway, we pass the Ramsey County Historical Society Research Center, free and open by appointment, in which knowledgeable staff will aid you in researching properties, building permits, and other historical information about homes and properties in Ramsey County. We finish our tour in the Landmark Center History Gallery, a fun interactive room that condenses all of this information using giant newspaper pages telling some of the building's history, provides stories about some of the individuals who built, worked, and held court in the building, and offers a fact-filled historical timeline. In fact, throughout the building, you will find framed panels that interpret moments in time, activities, and people who factored into this building's rich history. When you come and visit, take a moment to read them and learn more about our history. Today, Landmark Center is home to nonprofit arts agencies. It can be rented for private events, big and small, and maintains an active schedule of free and accessible community cultural programs. These may include noon and evening concerts, dance performances, workshops, history lectures, and programs featuring community-based performing groups. Landmark Center also has an impressive art collection of its own with works located throughout the building. Visit our website to learn more and for an up-to-date schedule of events. Landmark Center's transition from the past to the future is a proud example of the adaptive use of old buildings, the ultimate in recycling and stewardship. It stands as a testament to public efforts to save an important architectural structure and is proof indeed that old buildings can have new uses. I hope you enjoyed your virtual visit and hope you will visit Landmark Center in person, because as lovely as the images are in this video, they cannot compare to the beauty of the building and its architectural elements in real life.